When Olivia called me to ask whether I would share some memories of Granny D, I immediately said yes. She remains in my heart. Her spirit has been with me forever since she died. But, 23 years ago is when I first learned about Granny D. A colleague of mine at the National Voting Rights Institute, the nonprofit I was directing at the time, challenging big money in politics, came into my office and told me about this woman, 89 years old, who was walking across the country to overhaul our nation's campaign finance system. She says, you have to check this out. And all of us at the National Voting Rights Institute were inspired by her and what she was setting out to do. Walking through the rain, through the wind, through the snow, cross country skiing in places, 3,200 miles later, 14 months later, turning 90 in the process, she reached Washington, D.C. And I was honored to have been there that day among thousands of others to welcome her to Washington, D.C. I traveled down to make sure I could witness this amazing woman and her journey arriving in Washington. And I remember seeing her as she crossed that bridge from Arlington into D.C. And there was Senator Feingold and Senator McCain waiting to greet her, along with hundreds of others. And I was in awe of this inspiring human being who had inspired, really, at that point, millions around the globe for her willingness to stand up and fight for our democracy, to say no to big money in politics, no to corporate interests, and yes to one person, one vote, and the promise of political equality for all. And to be able to march in those remaining steps with her and many others to the nation's capital. She was resolute. She spoke with conviction that day, and so many other days since then, since I had gotten to know her. She stood up for what she believed in, and she went to jail for what she believed in. She got arrested, as we know, months later after that, for staging a protest in the U.S. Capitol, reading the Declaration of Independence, making clear that it was time to be independent from corporate interests. And, Granny D is somebody whose legacy will live on with all of us. And it's important to note that on the day of the Citizens United ruling in January of 2010, she reportedly thought about walking across the country again, outraged by that ruling and the way in which it swept away a century of precedent barring corporate money in our elections and sanctioning this corporate takeover of our democracy. And of course, we lost her 2 months later. But, the other point of this is that there was a movement that we were proud to be part of starting the day of the Citizens United ruling, calling for a constitutional amendment to overturn that ruling and the doctrines underlying that ruling of money equaling speech, which Granny D spoke out so much against, and corporations being treated as people with constitutional rights. And I've often thought about the fact that when Granny D was born in January of 1910, she was not even yet able to see the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. It came in her lifetime in 1920. She saw 9 amendments passed by the United States Congress, ratified by 3/4 of the states in her lifetime. And in this movement to fight for a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United and those fabricated doctrines, it's important to remember that change can happen in a lifetime. And that Granny D represented that kind of hope and that kind of change. I just will end this by saying that, Granny D's inspiration is something we need to hold on to at this moment in time, in this existential crisis we face in our democracy. We need to remember what it took for her at the age of 88, starting out and then turning 89, 90, walking across the country, and gain strength from that. We will miss you, Granny D, but your spirit lives on in all of us. And in your name, we will keep fighting for our democracy. Thank you.